This tennis player was struggling to keep her forehand in play, especially when hitting it hard. Can you tell why? It was so bad that she often had to block or slice her forehands just to be able to play tennis, and was starting to make her feel like quitting. Here's a hint. Watch the angle of her racket face throughout her swing. Watch how it moves a lot before, during, and after hitting the ball. Now here's the same player hitting forehands an hour or two later. Watch how much more stable the angle of her strings are now. Let me show you exactly the drills that we did together to dramatically improve her forehand consistency and confidence. But first things first, we need to address why what she's doing is so disruptive. Before I dove into the training with this student, I did a quick demonstration to illustrate a principle that's critical for you to understand if you're going to become good at tennis. These 3 swings that I made, the ball traveled to dramatically different locations, even though I used the same grip, I used the same long, smooth, circular swing, but there's one critical difference. Let me show you exactly what it is. On this first swing, I hit the ball over the net and in the court, and I want you to look at the angle of the racket strings at the point of contact. The strings are slightly open, which means off my racket, the ball is going to have a little bit of upward trajectory. I'm going to leave this line here, and I'll move forward to the next swing that I made with the same grip, with the same style of swing. These are all low to high swings, all smooth and relaxed and circular. On this forehand, the ball went into the back curtain on a fly, directly into the back curtain. And it should kind of terrify you to see that, yes, the angle of the strings is different than the one that went in play, but not by much. It's only 2 or 3 or maybe 4 degrees more open than the ball that went inside the court. So I'll leave that red line there, and now we're going to go to the third swing. This forehand went directly into the net. And look at the difference in the angle on this one. On this swing, my racket face is dead flat. So we've got 3 different racket face angles, 3 different forehand swings that all had a low to high swing, that all had a long, circular, smooth path, but the yellow angle at the point of contact put the ball in play. The red angle put the ball into the back curtain, and the blue angle put the ball directly into the net. It's critical to understand that the biggest difference that you can make in where the ball goes ultimately is going to be the angle of the strings at the point of contact. And the harder and more aggressively you swing, the more sensitive these little differences in angles become as far as where the ball ultimately ends up going. So now back to my student's original forehand, and I want you to keep a close eye on the angle of her racket face. As she takes the racket back right here, look at how the angle of her strings is facing slightly upwards. Her strings are slightly open. Now this doesn't look like a ton, but remember how small of a difference there was between me hitting the back curtain, me hitting the ball into the court, and me hitting the ball directly into the net. So when her racket face begins open, and then she drops the racket and goes forward to contact, her strings are still slightly open at contact, and then right after contact, she feels that she's launching a lot of forehands, and so she's trying to compensate and make up for that by at the very last second flipping and turning and closing her racket over. And depending on where in this flip she hits the ball, fractions of a second before contact, her strings are facing upwards. At contact, they're slightly upwards. Shortly after contact, they're flat, and then a little bit after that, they're facing straight down towards the court. So depending on exactly how she times this flip back and forth, the ball could go in a million different directions, anywhere from the bottom of the net to inside the court to literally hitting the back curtain. Before I show you the drills that we use to fix this issue step by step, let's look at how the best players in the world manage the angle of their racket face. So here's Carlos. Look at how initially his racket strings are slightly closed, slightly facing down towards the court surface. Then as he starts to unwind his body and pull the racket forwards, he's maintaining right about that same angle. It's pretty steady and pretty consistent so far. And as he continues towards contact and the racket starts to raise up towards the point of contact, you'll notice that right at the point of contact, he's got a pretty significantly closed racket face. So why is this? How come this ball isn't going directly into the net? Well, this swing has a tremendous amount of racket head speed and acceleration, and the direction of that swing is traveling upwards. So something has to keep that ball inside the court with all of this tremendous amount of vertical force going up through the point of contact. So when you study world-class professional players, you'll see that on average, their racket face tends to be slightly closed at contact. For regular everyday players like us, the angle of our strings to be successful should be right about square. Slightly open, if you start to accelerate and put a lot of force and energy into your swings, you'll start launching the ball. So this is a progressive thing. This is a spectrum. The higher your degree of acceleration, the more closed the angle of the strings needs to be to keep the ball in play. Next up, we've got Novak, definitely different style player. He's starting with his strings facing much more closed initially as he takes his racket back. Then as his body unwinds, the angle of his strings slightly opens as he starts to pull the racket forwards. And as he hits the ball, by the way, Carlos was playing points, just for context. Novak here is just engaging in a cooperative rally down the middle of the court. So the angle of his strings at contact on this particular swing are still closed, but not nearly as aggressively as Carlos because there's not nearly as much force that he's pulling the racket through the point of contact, so he doesn't have to close the angle of his strings as much. Notice, by the way, how the angle of his racket face stays super steady and consistent. There isn't any big volatile movements open or closed through the point of contact. And that's what is required to be a precise tennis player with the result of your shot. One more example, another different style. This is more of a next-gen kind of style with the angle of the strings initially actually pointing backward towards the back fence. Then as Jannik starts to unwind his body and pull the racket forwards, the strings transition to face downwards. Then as he continues to pull, the strings open up a little bit more than that. They're still angled downwards, but not nearly as much as when he started. And finally, by the time he fully unwinds and makes contact, the angle of his strings at contact, somewhere probably between Novak and Carlos here, slightly closed. But notice, all of these world-class examples, they're at no point in time are the strings facing upwards. That would be a recipe for disaster because they're putting so much force and so much acceleration into the point of contact that if at any point the strings were facing upwards at all, it would introduce a tremendous amount of volatility. And eventually, if that was mistimed, the opening and closing of the racket face, the ball would just spray all over the place. It'd be impossible to manage precisely. If you'd like to continue learning how to keep hitting your forehand harder while also keeping it in play consistently and confidently, make sure to go to forehandpower.com and pick up the free training that I have for you there. It'll show you step-by-step drills that I've been using with my students for years to help them get 15 miles per hour or more of additional speed on their forehand in just 15 minutes of practice. I show you my favorite progressions to be able to learn how to use your body more strongly, powerfully, and efficiently, and also add more topspin to curve the ball and keep it in play. It's absolutely free, and you can get it at forehandpower.com. So how do we fix this? Here's drill number 1. I'm having my students slowly shadow through some swings, and on these first couple, I'm asking her, please close the angle of your racket face too much. And so she's doing a great job here demonstrating, here's what the angle of her strings would be like if just hypothetically, and we're doing this just for her experience so that she can get to know the relationship between her hand and the angle of the strings. By the way, at no point do we change her grip. This is just all about the alignment of her hand, the relationship between her hand and her body as she pulls the racket forwards. And so notice on this practice swing, now the angle of her strings are facing downwards, and she maintains a very closed racket face through the imaginary point of contact. So after a couple of those, I said, okay, great job. Now show me what would it look like to have your strings too open through the point of contact. And here she is demonstrating that, just building her awareness of what exactly is the angle of the racket. And now, finally, I'm telling her, let's shoot for square. Let's just say hypothetically on a full speed swing for this, a 3-5 player and just an everyday tennis player, let's say we need right about a square racket face at contact in order to hit confidently, full acceleration, and keep the ball in play on the other side. So now finally she's shadowing through, and I'm having her kind of pause a little bit and stop at the point of contact to show herself what would it look like and feel like to maintain a square racket face at contact. So notice how now kind of intuitively she is starting with a closed racket face. In her original forehand, remember, she would initiate with an open racket face and basically hold that open angle all the way up until the point of contact. Now she's starting to close it and bring the racket forward and upwards, just like the professional players. As the racket raises, the angle of the strings are slightly opening. And now in real life, this would be very close to what we need in order to keep the ball in play. Now it's time to hit a ball. I had her shadow a couple more. And this is literally her first ever ball, her first try at managing the angle of her strings, and she did fantastic. Slightly closed racket face here. Then after dropping, she's coming up towards contact. And by the way, anytime you're practicing something specific like this, it's critical that there's other things. You're going to be very tempted to go to the comments and be like, oh, she's not doing this, she's not doing this. It doesn't matter right now. We're targeting something specific, fundamental, that's critical to her success. We're going to let go of everything else that might be wrong in this particular moment so she can stay focused on the task at hand. So on this particular swing, she started with the strings slightly closed, came up, hit the ball with a slightly open racket face. I told her, and by the way, look at, she has gotten rid of that flip of the angle of the racket face, which is critical. And so now we've got a much more steady, much more consistent angle of racket face. We're maintaining a square face, close to a square face through the point of contact. That's going to keep the ball in play. We're no longer flipping and twisting the angle of the strings. This is going to lead to much more precise, much more confident swings in the long run. And so watch how much better this looks from a back angle, how now instead of the strings being slightly open, they're closed. She's dropping the racket, maintaining that angle, then coming up towards the point of contact, slightly open racket face here at the point of contact, and then maintaining the angle of her racket face through the point of contact. So much more steady, much more solid, much more consistent. And if you watch the ball, see the ball rotating end over end towards the camera. And so initially the ball is turning towards her racket. And now watch the writing on the ball as it travels away from her racket. See the writing on the ball there? Rotating end over end towards the other side of the court. This student had never been able to hit with topspin before. And now that she's starting to manage and maintain a closed/square face through the point of contact, she's actually starting to roll the ball forwards towards the other side of the court. And that's a super exciting breakthrough for a player like this that's just been kind of shoveling, scooping, and like flipping her racket face for years and years and years. On the right are her first new forehands hit from the baseline, and on the left are her original forehands. I want you to look at how stark of a contrast this is. She did an incredible job. On the left side, look at how she starts off with that open racket face. Tons of volatility baked in here. And on the right, as she drops the racket head down, look at how the angle of her strings is slightly closed. That's going to give her a lot of confidence and a lot of ability to just pull the racket confidently through the point of contact. So on the right, she doesn't have to do any kind of flipping or twisting or turning of the racket strings. She can just pull the racket upwards through contact and maintain a steady and solid angle of hand and racket, no longer having to manage the angle of her strings. Whereas the original forehand, the one on the left, watch how at the last second, she feels the need, and she really kind of has to create this like flipping motion because she's so used to the ball trampolining and just launching off her strings that she just intuitively feels the need to have to do this last second flip and twist. Sometimes she would time it right, sometimes not. And that was what was leading to all her inconsistency and lack of confidence in this swing. So this new one on the left is going to open the door to much more consistent, precise results. Also going to open the door to being able to hit the ball much harder without worrying about launching the ball and hitting it too far over and over again. Speaking of which, if you want to add 15 miles per hour to your forehand, make sure to go to forehandpower.com, where I'll show you step-by-step drills to continue improving your forehand to make it more consistent but also more powerful at the same time by adding additional topspin, by basically picking up right where we left off here with this lesson. I'll show you how to dramatically increase how powerful your forehand is in just a couple practice sessions. Go to forehandpower.com, pick that up for free. Thank you so much for watching today, and I'll catch you in the next lesson.